guys, our guest today is working to revolutionize the way churches look at support in areas of administration and creative by alleviating burdens from being staff roles. He watched his own parents struggle through budget, staffing, and volunteer crunch in their church, all while trying to focus on ministry. And if you've served in ministry, you know those feelings. He himself went on to serve in diverse church environments, and he saw the same challenges no matter the size or growth stage, and he wanted to do something about it. And the rest, as they say, is history. Hey Church is now standing in the gap for churches with a collaborative platform for project management. Each church partner works with a ministry advocate, which I think is so cool, to collaborate with church leaders at a frequency that they set to handle projects for them. Preston Crawford, it's a privilege to have you. Having been in ministry and worked in other sectors, I keep waiting for more people like you in the world. So just thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit more about your story of where you were and how you came to this idea.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's been a long time coming for me, creating Hey Church in the state that it is today. As you mentioned, my parents are pastors, so I'm a pastor's kid, which means I'm a lot of trouble as is. But growing up, I watched my parents plant a church. I think I was maybe 6 when they planted. And so when you grow up in that space, you see the good, the bad, and the ugly of church. Yeah. But my parents were fantastic. We never, as kids, there was 4 of us, never became jaded with church. We all grew up and are still in church, which is amazing testament to my parents and raising us and being great pastors. And they're still pastoring to this day. So they've been going on strong. So I grew up in the church, saw a lot of the internal structure of it and how it works and what can be better. And I've always been kind of the entrepreneurial mindset. So even as a kid, I went through various business phases. At one time, I set up a bank under a bench and I made my sisters give me money because I was their banker. So I always had these ideas on how I could make my own business. And because of that, when you have that mindset, you always see what could be better and applying that to the church space. So as I went on, I wanted to be in ministry and follow after my dad's footsteps. And so I went off to Bible college in Australia. And during that, I had always had this mindset of being bivocational. And so while I was studying theology, I got an internship in marketing and I started, because I'm a tenacious person, started my own freelance business within 6 months of my internship because I thought I knew a lot. But I was going to a larger church at the time and I got some clients within the first 6 months. I think I had 4 clients and I started doing their marketing. And that was the first kind of taste of owning my own business. And so then the goal became go into ministry and also have a business so I could support myself and never wanted to be a financial burden on the church. So anyways, things kept going. The business kept growing. I moved back to the States and I was working for for-profit companies at the time. So I moved back to the States. I started working with action brands like snowboarding brands and surfing brands, which was a lot of fun, but I started getting churches reaching out and they were asking for consulting on how to communicate and build communities and how to build websites and set up a digital presence. And then especially in 2020, when every church needed a digital presence, it really kind of came to fruition that churches should modernize in some areas and getting online. So I started getting more churches and nonprofits reaching out about that. And the business, it was a digital marketing agency I was running. It could have just transitioned and kept the name, but I thought, let's make something specific to churches that can be the one-stop shop. And so that's where Hey Church came. And it was also something else that was happening at that time was I was getting married. And so I was leaving my parents' church. And it was something you actually mentioned before we jumped on was when I left, I didn't want them to have to fill that space. And in reality, they are a smaller church, so they couldn't fill that space of the graphic designer and the digital marketer and everything that I was doing. And it's not because there's nobody that can do what I do. It's just that there was nobody there that could do what I could do. And so they would have had to hire out. And so instead of hiring a full-time position that has to wear multiple hats, I thought, what if I create an agency where you can go to a one-stop, get your admin needs, your communication needs, and your creative needs all in one place. So it's really Hey Church that's where it came from, was providing resources to local community churches that they might not have access to. And this will reduce burnout. This will reduce the budgeting constraints of having to hire multiple people. So anyways, that's kind of the fruition story. There was multiple facets that kind of led to this.
Sure.
But now we're here and I'm excited about it.
That's amazing. Yeah, coming from being on staff at a church and feeling kind of a similar draw to, I've never wanted to be, we're not financial burdens when we're vocational, but still, like, if I can do something else and not need that financial support in that way, if God
Right.
can like help me find that in another way. And I spent a long time praying through that before I left. So that's really cool that you kind of felt the same thing. And I feel like I'm connecting with so many people right now who have felt those similar tugs to like, hey, you can do other stuff and the church can use those funds to do more.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah. So I'm assuming with Hey Church, you kind of get a nice toolkit, but you're also not paying a salary for,
Right.
and you're getting multiple people who are specialists versus like this one
Yeah.
person who you're expecting to do 100 different things.
Exactly. And it was applying a for-profit model. So again, I owned a creative agency, it was a full stack digital marketing agency. And it was the same concept. A for-profit business would come to me and I would be their point of contact. But behind me, I've got web designers, I've got developers, I've got designers and videographers. And so I was doing that for other businesses. So why not apply the model for the church, where a pastor or admin can speak right with me or one of the ministry advocates, but get the full force of a team. And I think it makes it simple.
Now, that being said, I know there's so much with AI. There's so much software coming down the pike every day right now.
Yep.
Whether it's, I mean, there's even not only task management software, but leadership development software that's supposed to do it all for you.
Right.
And I know that can create sometimes confusion about what do I need a human to do? And what do I need? What can this software handle for me? So, how do you handle that? How do you feel like owners and lead pastors should look at these types of options? And what do you feel like sets things apart from each other?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a big advocate of trying and finding what works for you. I don't think there is a one-stop solution, though Hey Church will do its best to be that.
But we will.
Yeah. But you're right. There is a lot of new technology coming out in the AI space, and even just simplifying like design platforms. Canva came out years ago. Easy website builders. There's a million different tech startups that are making it easier and more accessible to receive these services. I think the air of caution I have is just because you're willing to do something doesn't always mean you're able to do it. And again, I think just the stress a lot of churches feel is you've got either one pastor full time or a pastor and a personal assistant or an admin. You're dealing with a small team and there's already a lot on a ministry plate to do. There's actual in-person preparing for preaching or running small groups or meeting face-to-face, all those things that only a person can do. And so those other tools like AI and like Canva, for instance, or other builders are great, but how much time do you want to take to learn all of those platforms as well? And as easy as they get, like I use a lot of them. I'm an early adopter for a lot of this tech and it's fun to play around with, but it still has a bit to go. And there's also quite a learning curve to get the results that you want, because templates are fantastic. And you can jump on Canva and start working with a template. But then if you think of a bigger picture of like a brand consistency for your church. So if you're thinking online presence, you can go to Canva and find a great template and have a one-off cool design. But then you go back and you try and find a different template that matches the old template. And now you're in this nest of like trying to figure everything out. So I think it comes back to how much time do you really want to dedicate to that and all of that. But there's tons of great tools. And I know a lot of pastors who are very tech savvy and they love that. But again, my caution is just because you're willing to do something doesn't mean you always should be doing it. Let's find the best solution for you and for the church.
How do you, like, what advice would you give to someone who's maybe grown? Because I see this with both owners and lead pastors. So they, as a startup, it's like we're making our own social media post and we're doing all this stuff every day. How do you decide how would you advise someone to look at their landscape and say, this is something I should now sub out, or this is something now we should not I should not be doing anymore, because I feel like that's the hardest turn, is when you've crafted
Hmm.
it, you're like, oh, I have to give it away now.
Right.
But so
Yeah.
what advice do you give to someone when you're talking to them about how to figure out what the next step is on what you do?
Yeah, I think taking a constant inventory of tasks and what fuels you up and what gets the most results. So whether
So
it's
good.
ministry or business, it's constantly the 20-80 rule, right? That
Yeah.
20% of what you do produces 80% of the results. So for me, something that a discipline I try and put in place is a task tracker where at the end of the day or end of the week, I'll write down everything that I did and then also compare that to the results of the week. So I might have had a week that I thought I was super productive and did a lot of small tasks, but I didn't move the needle at all. And so maybe those are tasks I like doing, but I shouldn't be doing. So again, this goes back
Mm.
to able or willing, but not able. So
Yeah.
if there's a lot of things I like doing, but I'm not great at, maybe that's something I can start delegating and outsourcing to another team member or somebody else. And so whenever we think about scaling up and capacity, Gino Wickman, I highly recommend looking into his stuff. He does the EOS model, and there's
Yeah.
There's a metric of it, and there's 4 quadrants of it. And anyways, the top one I believe is things that you love to do and you're great at, and then the bottom right are things that you're not good at and you don't like doing. And then in between is kind of what I was just talking about, of things you are good at but maybe don't like, or things you're good at and maybe shouldn't do. So I think that's a great starting point for any leader who, as they're growing and getting bigger, is delegating. Delegating is the best way to continue your growth and protect your time and space.
I love that you said that model, because it is my favorite model to run with
Hmm.
someone when I sit down and they go, I just have so much to do and there's no one else that can do it. And
Right.
a lot of times it's that top left, I love to do this and I
Yep.
don't have to do
Yep.
or top right, I think, but I love
Yeah.
to do this and I don't have to do this. And that's the hardest box to give away.
Yep.
But it's the one that's the easiest to give away.
Hmm.
So I love that you said too that you reflect on your week and what you get out of the task you've done, because we look at an ROI when it comes to monetary and financial investments, or even the time of our people and the labor, but an ROI on your own labor
Hmm.
is something I don't think as leaders we take a lot of time to do.
Right.
And I love that point. So that was really profound, because I don't think as leaders we do a good job of that. We're thinking about everybody we've delegated to or the investment we've put in, but an
Hmm.
ROI on actually our own energy can be a game changer when it helps us decide what to delegate out, maybe to a team like yours.
Right. Right.
That's really great. Um, Talking about the software piece too, it's funny you talked about someone having to learn it, because I always am stuck on the thought of garbage in, garbage out when it
Right.
comes to tech.
Yep.
And I have seen time and time again where it's, oh, this software can save us. And the sales rep did such a good job.
Hmm.
And no, I love software, first of all. I need
Right.
software in my life. I need to say that. But then we hand it off and we've never planned how to do a rollout. And we've
Mm.
never selected the leader of the rollout. And
Right.
no one's picked up the manual, for lack of a better way to describe it. So then a year later, you have this software and supposedly it could do all of these things, but maybe it's an address book that's just really expensive.
Right. Right. Yeah,
so,
that's so true.
so when it comes to that, if someone were to outsource with you, I'm assuming you're working through your own software to meet their needs and kind of communicate so they kind of know what's going on without
Mhm.
having to do those pieces.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely, yeah, that experience you just described is so true. And I think it's something the church and a lot of organizations, not just the church, should learn that. Just the simple term product owner, who owns
Yes.
this product, is so important. Whether you're in business, wherever you are, if you manage people in software, get a product owner that learns it and does it.
Yeah.
So how we kind of solve that problem at Hey Church is our goal is to have the most simple, easy platform. So we have a customer portal that you can log in, and that's where you submit your tasks and speak one-on-one with your ministry advocate. And we call them ministry advocates. They're your point of contact person. It's only one person you ever have to deal with. And the reason for that is because that makes it simple. You don't have to talk to multiple people, but you can log into your account, message them, request a task, and then that ministry advocate then kind of breaks it down. So for instance, if you're a pastor and this week you need Sunday slides, you could submit your sermon and say, here's my key points. And then if there's any points of clarification, the ministry advocate will say, hey, can you just clarify this? And then we'll get started on it. And then the ministry advocate then talks to our designer on the team. They get it all done, turnaround times, maybe a day or two. And then the pastor has all the slides without having to worry about Canva or making a PowerPoint. And then we also, you can have multiple users as well. And so if the pastor requests that, then we can also send it to your AV team. And so then that's another, I don't know if you've ever dealt with a Sunday morning where the pastor's running back to the sound booth to try and get his PowerPoint up there.
Or at least someone is.
Somebody is, yeah. So we try and make it as simple. And all of our team works in church. We volunteer at church. And like myself, I've been in church my whole life. And so we know the ins and outs and can anticipate what's going to happen at the downstream effect of this task. And so whatever it is, your ministry advocate knows the questions to follow up with and make it easy. And so, and we've got an onboarding process. So when you sign up, you get in contact with that ministry advocate, and then we'll train you how to make the requests and what to look out for and expectations. So we try to remove all those blind spots and make it simple. And one thing that I pride ourselves on is we send monthly reports on tasks that you completed and maybe future tasks that you could start implementing. So we try and make it as easy as possible and kind of be that coach and advocate for you. That's the simplest word.
So I know we can all naturally think of things like slides for sermons, but
Mm-hmm.
what about the church that maybe these creative parts and the project management of them doesn't really fall into a skill set of anyone there? How do you do kind of intuitive thinking for them if you don't know what to ask for beyond
Right.
sermon slides? Like, what else do we need to get this message out?
Yeah.
How can they get your assistance in that?
Definitely. So my background again was in marketing and communication. And one of my favorite parts was consulting. I loved sitting down with a business owner and talking through brand strategy. How are you building community? How are you building an audience? And so obviously in church, the stakes are much higher than just sales. We're talking about actual people and making life-changing opportunities for them to be a part of a church and engaged. And so when I get the opportunity to speak with a pastor or the ministry advocate speaking with an admin, then we can talk through, hey, here's some of your past things that you've done. Here's some potential opportunities for that, whether that be let's focus on social media, or let's get your website updated, or let's start sending a weekly newsletter. There's very small steps that churches can take to build community. And we want to build out that roadmap for them and make it as easy as possible. Because not only are we just sending out suggestions, we can back it up with, if you want to do it, we can do it. And so we really want to be that team behind you that's helping you think of the things that you're not thinking of, because you're doing a lot of in-person ministry, which we can't do for you. And so the things we can do for you, let's take those out off your plate. So yes, we love consulting. We love that back and forth, and we don't want it to just be a stone wall. Send us your requests. We want it to be a conversation and help grow the church is our ultimate goal here.
Yeah, I asked that. I was a marketing major as well. So when you said that, I was like, same.
Yep.
But I find sometimes that when I was on staff, the hardest part was not that I don't love those things, but to your point, it wasn't the goal. So, but I wanted someone to be thinking of those things.
Right.
Because I didn't have the margin to do it. What do you say to someone who's listening, who's kind of like, I don't know how I feel about like the fact that churches market? Because I love the way you described that you're kind of marketing for the ultimate goal.
Right.
But share a little bit about that, because I've had some interesting conversations with other pastors in the past few months as they wrestle with people's perceptions of those things.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely, whenever I have these conversations with people, I think it falls kind of on an ethical boundary. So my dad's a bit like this as well. He hates marketing his church. It's like he just wants the community church. He wants to take care of his people. And I'm like, yes, that's so true. And when we talk about it, the reason he hates marketing for churches, and I think this resonates for a lot of people, is when you market a business, you put out the perfect like product. You're putting out, this is the ideal lifestyle you're going to have. when you drink Coca-Cola or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's what marketing is. It's projection. But when you market for a church, it's not so much projection. It's more of like, here's a reality of it. And so I think the disconnect is when you have a small church that's posting an unsplashed picture of a mega church. And then they run an ad with that, with thousands of people with their hands lifted in the air and a lighted stage. And then somebody visits that church and it's 15 people and a guitar, and which is beautiful. That's amazing. But don't fake people out with your mega church advertising. That's not who you are. So I think people kind of feel that disconnect when you think of marketing, because you think marketing's icky. Why would you make it look like it's not? So when I talk about marketing for churches and suggest it, I try and drill down to what is your core principle that your church is passionate about. And so obviously every church is passionate about seeing souls saved and people coming to the church. But more than that, there's usually an underlying tone. So for churches in Portland who their focus might be food banks or something like that.
Yeah.
So how can we focus on that and just kind of just celebrate that on your Instagram or celebrate that on your social media? And that attracts people and shows them the heart of the church. And that's where marketing for the church comes to me, is not projecting a fake lifestyle of join our church and you'll be beautiful, but more like join our church because you align with the mission. So there's kind of that twofold, and this conversation can go on for hours.
Yeah,
and hours.
totally can. I'm laughing at what you said because when my daughter went to college in a major metro, and when she got there and started visiting churches, you don't see that as much kind of where we are. A lot of the churches seem to be very real in what they put out, but she went to one and literally what you described of like one visual being put out. Cause I don't know if anyone's listening or watching and they've had to visit churches like in a new town. You go to the website and you search to actually figure out, what does it look like inside? What does it look like in worship? Like, you want to know. And so she did all of that. And then she got there and it was like the complete opposite experience. And she was like, they weren't bad people, but it just like, it was not at all what they said they were. And it made her uncomfortable. So that's actually so cool that you positioned it that way. You said something interesting about celebrating what they're already doing, celebrating who they are, and marketing that way. If someone's listening who's an owner, I've had a conversation this week with an owner who we talked about that with his company, and that there's this seems to be a turn in the marketplace where people want things that are real.
Yeah.
And how do you help people when it comes to teaching them how to celebrate real stories and to celebrate things that are already true in their brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the starting point is knowing what's true and real in your brand. Because as leaders, I think we sometimes get blindsided by our vision. We get blindsided by, this is what I want my church to look like, so this is what I'm celebrating. Or this is what I want my business to look like, and this is what I'm celebrating. But so taking it in business terms, you might have an ideal of what your business looks like or where you want it to be, but the market's over here and the market's celebrating something about your business that you're not aware of. So you got to find that connect. And I think that's true with churches, is the pastors, like if your church is growing and being really healthy, you could think it's because of something else than it actually is. And so talking with
that's true.
And so talking with your team and talking with the congregation and saying, hey, what are the things that you actually care about in this church? What are things that you see we're doing well? One of my recent podcasts for setting up the new year talked about doing surveys in churches, because a lot of in tech and business, we do like NPS, Net Promoter Scores, or CSAT, customer satisfaction. So obviously you don't need to title that for a church. You're not looking for customer satisfaction, but a quick annual survey of what was one thing you saw us do in the last year that you celebrated or you felt passionate about, and then taking those results. And that's how you can learn what people care about and what the church is doing well. So anyways, I think that that's one potential disconnect, and how you can close that gap is just talking with the people, whether it be business, talk with your consumers, and if it's church, talk with your congregation, find out what they care about and what they're celebrating. And then that's what the church is celebrating. Your church is people. So if your people are celebrating it, then the church is celebrating it.
Have you ever worked with, it's so cool you said that about finding out from their words.
Mhm.
Have you ever worked with a church or a client who's maybe gone through a harder season and they're a little bit afraid of what the vision might be of others right now, or they're coming out and they're trying to tell people something's different? I mean, that happens in the marketplace and in the church.
Mhm.
How do you handle that? How do you work with someone on that?
Yeah, I think uh, man, it really comes back to the humility of the leader to be
Yeah.
able to hear that. Um, this situation that came to mind was a situation that wasn't handled well. And I remember the tension because I was part of the team and I was just a middleman between everything. And I remember
It's a fun
we had,
spot when you're in a
yeah,
situation like that to be the middleman.
yep. You learn a lot and it's great. But we had two team members that were really feeling like they weren't resourced. They were on the edge of burnout, and leadership just kept wanting them, just keep pressing in. This was a church situation. So there's always that balance of like, how far do you push your volunteers?
Oh, yeah.
And so it just kept getting worse and worse. And then one day they just didn't show up. And it was actually our worship leader. And so that's not a good day when your worship leader doesn't show up.
Wow.
so they don't show up. And I remember feeling that we just didn't do enough as a church to come around them and support them. And as leadership, not even just the church, the leadership specifically. And so that's one area where you have to listen to those red flags, those warning signs. And then on the adverse, it's much easier to miss the good signs of things that are going well. But yeah, just being willing to listen and have honest conversations and realize as a leader that you can be wrong and that's okay. It's better to be wrong and fix something than just be wrong and let it keep breaking. So yeah, that was the situation that came to mind. But just humility to listen to your people and customers, and I think also in business when you have negative customer interactions, it's
Yeah.
always so easy to get defensive and think, "Well, you just didn't use my product right," or "You just didn't," you just think of
Yeah.
all the things to defend yourself. But just taking a step back and saying, "Okay, maybe just maybe we did mess up here, and what can we learn from it, and what can we hear the people saying?"
No, that's so good. Thank you for talking about that. That's a hard one, but I know if I had you and I was in a situation like that, I'd be like, I don't know where to go, but I don't really want to ask anybody
Yeah.
else right now.
It's scary.
Yeah, switching gears a little bit. You wrote that Romans 12:4-8 was something you leaned into a lot when it came to your work. So I was going to read it and then I would love for you to just
Mm,
share because it's one of my favorites too.
cool.
Um, for as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given us, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith; if service, in our serving; the one who teaches in his teaching; the one who exhorts in his exhortation; the one who contributes in generosity; the one who leads with zeal; the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness.
Yeah.
I went with
Yeah.
the ESV. I mean, there's 100 ways, but I love every version of that one.
Love it. Yeah, I love the scriptures specifically for the church and with Hey Church, how we serve the church. I find a good balance here. And I think with what Paul's writing here is to affirm the diversity of the church. And so firstly, I think the context for the church is understanding that each one of us have a different role, and that is a beautiful thing to celebrate. We all think
Yes.
differently. We all have different functions, and that's what makes it work. And as leaders, whether it be church or business, we can fall into the false trap of wanting people who think like us, who have similar skill sets to us, because we want more of us because we're great. And so, and that's,
Yeah.
yeah. Right.
Similarity complex is so helpful in so many things. Not
Yeah.
at all. Not at all.
No. And so that's what this scripture is about, is let's have diversity and let's work together in that. And I think it's a bit of a point of pride if you think you can do everything. And so this is a good reminder
Mm,
verse of, hey, okay. And going back to what we talked about with delegating, how do you grow? You grow through diversity. It's a beautiful thing. It's how the church is supposed to work. I think it's a great method for how the business world can work. And how this kind of applies with Hey Church is, if you're a small church and you operate in a few key areas, great. well, what are the areas that you might need to plug in to your team? And so that's where my hope is that Hey Church can fit into churches and pastors' lives, is know what you're good at and then let us handle the rest for the time being, whether it's a short period until the church gets bigger and you can hire a full-time staff, or whether it's a long-term relationship. Let's help each other, because I know that I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not good at everything. And you're good at a lot of things, but not good at everything. So let's partner up and let's work together. So yeah, this scripture has a lot of meaning and to me in the church. And I hope that Hey Church can fill that gap and helping the church grow.
I always like to use this verse when people struggle with things like churches marketing or churches producing, or someone who's in business but making a profit and someone's making them feel guilty about that because they leave faith forward. I love that discussion anyway.
Yeah.
But when you look at scripture, going back to Exodus 31 and the building of the tabernacle, and then you look at Romans 12 in the New Testament, God is always saying, I made you this way to do this thing. And I made this person to do this thing. So why would we say that one of those gifts is more important than the one over here? They're not, but they should all be used to glorify him. Yeah. So I love that you shared that, because someone who is listening is probably a CEO who doesn't think they have the time to serve, or doesn't know how to give or how to tailor their giving, but they're equipped with skills that the church could use and they're serving. Yeah. And the same for the church, being able to care for someone who's grown something too fast and doesn't know how to care for the people on their team. There are things we can teach each other if we would work together in those processes. And I always go back to this verse for that, because I love how as Christians, how as Christians, we will say one is more important than the other when it comes to gifts and skill sets. So I just love that spells it out so clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true.
So, since you started this, you're not that far in. Like, you've been doing this for a long time, but Hey Church itself is how far in?
We are in our second year now, so we are
making
very
it
young. Yeah, we made the first year live, and so we're looking to thrive on the second one.
That's the turn. The turn. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Has there any? You're kind of working in this beautiful space where you're working with churches, but you're leading a business.
Yep.
What have been some challenges that were unexpected that you've clearly overcome because you're thriving in year 2?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think a lot of them have been smaller kind of obstacles, just getting things up and running. I've definitely had the benefit of part of the model of Hey Church was borrowed from a similar model of a church in Australia called Virtual Church Assist. And so they were great. I got to meet with the owner early on when I first had the concept, and she was like, I don't want to work in America. And I was like, sweet, I don't want clients in Australia. So there was no conflict there. And she was very great on helping me kind of foreshadow some roadblocks and set up the model. And so we haven't had any big mistakes or issues yet. So we'll see about year 2. But I think it's just, when you work with churches and you work with businesses, there is that tension of like, how much do we cut our costs of service, but how much do we also focus on being a business that has profits? And so I think there's more so been internal struggle of, my heart is to serve the church, and the people on my team, their hearts to serve the church. So how do we do that, but also like grow a business and balance all of that? And I don't know if I have all the answers, but that's been a fun thing to figure out. And young startup is my favorite, this is my second business, so it's fun going through that process again. We're like, all right, well, let's see what we're doing this week.
What's it gonna be today?
Yeah.
No, that's great. I love that you took a mentor and someone who was actually doing what you wanted to do for all intents and purposes, and boldly had the conversation. What would you say to someone who feels like they have someone they might want to reach out to partner with, but they feel fear and how that might be perceived, or they might see it as competition, or someone who has skills to give but doesn't want to work with perceived competition to help them grow? What do you say to that?
Wow, that's two very different angles. I'll take them
They
at
are.
different times.
I was like, we need to talk about both of those.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for the person reaching out, I think you just got to get over that fear. There's a term I learned in college that has stuck with me, and it was a lecturer told me once. She said, "Just do it afraid." And it was in a ministry course, so specifically about ministry. But I've kind of applied it to multiple areas in my life. That if you feel like you want to do something and it's going to be positive, then if you have a fear of it, do it afraid. And also, there's always that, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get a no, or you're going to get ghosted, and that's really not that bad. And so I think reaching out to mentors or just business people that you want to learn from, or even church leaders, I think just go for it and have a plan. John Maxwell talks about this a lot.
Yeah, he does.
And just having questions and being cautious of that leader's time or that influencer's time, and say, hey, be very specific with your asks. Say, hey, I just want 30 minutes of your time. Here's the questions I have. Here's what my goals are. Can you help me? And then something I usually add when I reach out to people is, or I follow up with, is, if you're not able to help me, who should I talk to? Which is another thing I think John Maxwell says. He asks people, well, what book should I read, or who else should I talk to? And so kind of just keep knocking on those doors until you get an answer, and just go for it. You're only going to be better off for it. And it just teaches you a bit of grit. It's okay to get a no once in a while.
Grit's my favorite. We can talk about Angela Duckworth all day on this. She's the best. I had my oldest just read that book this year about grit. So it was awesome. I was like, can we talk about it today? How much have you read? Let's talk about it all the time. Awesome. No, it's funny you say that, because yesterday I was on the phone with a mentor who, it was like, took everything within me to ask this person for some time about 6 months ago. And we've done a couple of calls now. And I think about when I was very young, not recognizing when I took up too much of someone's time. Yeah. So those tips are very helpful, because I remember we had a 30-minute slot yesterday, which is all I ever try to do with someone that's that busy, to honor them. And it hit 10:02. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Right. But I can remember me before being like, oh, they're going to spend all day with me.
Right. Yeah. You have this optimism.
Like 20 years ago. Yeah. We would be best friends. It'd be great.
Yeah.
No, I think those are really important tips.
Yeah, for sure. I think on the adverse side of, if you're a person with knowledge to give down, I think the first thing that came to mind was the entrepreneurs or leaders that I respect and would love to be mentored by. They are not afraid of competition. And so I think there's also that kind of competitive edge of, if you're a good business owner and there's somebody else who wants to jump in the market, I think, why not let them? It's a little bit fun, why not add to the market and see if you can raise them? But I think there's also, from a Christian and perspective of discipling, that you might be the top business owner now, but you could grow somebody under you, and who's to say they might not work for you or work in your business, and how can you benefit each other? And I don't think there has to be that competitive edge. I just think it's funny to think of it from that angle. But yeah, and I also find the more that I mentor or teach, the sharper I get. I used to be a music teacher. I learned playing drums. And when I became a teacher for a time, I became a way better musician, because if you can teach something, then you actually understand it. If you understand enough to teach it, then you really know the principles of it, and you're only going to get better. So I think it really benefits yourself to be mentoring and pouring out into other people. That's
so great. I love the thought of choosing a mentor too that isn't insecure in the fact that you'd be competition. Right. I was in a small group yesterday morning, and they were talking about their different industry cultures. And one of the industries that they're in is like, it's baking. So it seems like they should all be like hanging out and having a good time. And it's apparently very cutthroat.
Oh, no.
So the thing that came up, and I feel like it's important to say here, is if you're in an industry where you feel like there isn't support or it's very cutthroat, you'd be surprised if you became the person who was a source, because those people who become the sources are the people that grow the most, because people will refer to them without feeling
Hmm.
threatened. They will reach
Right.
out to them. And I was in an industry before when I was an owner that it started one way, and I felt like the trajectory changed so to be so much healthier further down the road. And it was because of that. There was a couple people that were like, that's not really what we do. We're
Yeah.
not going to work. We're just not going to allow that mentality. So just a little encouragement. If
Yeah.
someone's listening going, but nobody in my industry is nice like that, just keep trying or be the
Yeah.
nice person.
Yeah, exactly.
So, um, with a startup and with leadership and working directly with so many strong leaders
Hmm.
and working with churches, you learn a lot about yourself. And when the board meeting is just you, the feedback can be super insightful. How do you handle your weaknesses? You said something
Hmm.
interesting when we were first emailing back and forth about how you use self-analysis a lot and you no longer waste time on your weaknesses, waste too
Right.
much time focusing on them.
Hmm.
Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. That's been a long journey for me. I think early on in my career, I was always taught to work on your weaknesses, strengthen your weaknesses, become great at everything. And I think this is just kind of a through theme with our podcast today from the scripture and everything we talk about is you're not going to be good at everything.
Yeah.
And that's because diversity is better than just
Mm.
you doing it. And I'm very quick these days, probably too quick to delegate things. And so, which is
Same.
helpful to have other team members that can tell me not to. They're like, hey, why don't you just hold on to this a little bit longer? And I'm like, all right, fine, I will.
Your
Um,
staff sounds awesome.
yeah, they are great. And so, yeah, but when it's just you getting started, I have a few disciplines in place. So I have a weekly tactical by myself before I have
Mm.
team to jump on. And I set up things. I love organizational structure. So I always think through where do I want the business to be in 1, 3, 10 years? And what can I do now that's going to be the foundation for that? And so it's silly, but I set up like a one-on-one with myself. And then I set up a team
Oh, yeah.
tactical. That's myself. And I did that for a long time. And you talk through, it sounds funny, but you talk through kind of what are the problems or think through. And you write down your steps for what's my action steps for the next week. And you think through what didn't work. And you kind of workshop that with yourself. And that's how I've stayed on top of things. And then when I have a team member that joins the team, we can look back on all those notes of what was achieved, what was worked on, what worked, what didn't work. You have a record of the business. And then you can just keep moving and scaling from there. So I really focus on how can I set myself up for scalability in the future? Because
Yeah.
I Hey Church isn't a one-man shop, and it's not going to be that. I want it to be bigger and have more teams so we can resource more churches. So yeah, that's one way. I think you just be self-reflective. And then we talked about the matrix with the EOS
The
model.
EOS model. Yeah.
I go over that frequently, and I have a accountability chart or organizational chart. Again, the EOS model does the accountability, and I
Yeah.
will put those tasks that I don't want to do anymore on an unnamed role. and I was like, okay, sweet. In a year, I'm gonna staff this
Yes.
position, and that's gonna be off my plate. And so that's kind of how I plan it. As I'm reflecting, I'm also forecasting and planning ahead. So that's how I've done it. I think if you just get reflective and document everything is a very good way to stay sane and look towards the future.
I think all of that is so important too for burnout protection. And I
Yeah.
love that you said that because in a startup, you're going so fast. And when people talk about things like you just talked about, you're like, well, that must work for you. It must be nice to have time to do that. But the
Right.
point is you'll never have time if you
Yeah.
don't have time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you sharing that. How do you make sure that you're protecting yourself from burnout while you're getting this vision off the ground?
Yeah. I think knowing what your burnout looks like is good, which you only really learn when you've been through a burnout, which is unfortunate. But knowing that,
Yeah, that's how I learned about it. So,
yeah, exactly. And then you know how far you can go. But again, knowing what motivates you and and gets you excited. So I love working on the business. Being a business owner, having a team is one of my great passions. From early on in my career, I've always known that I wanted to be a builder of people and of business and of church. That's my personal calling. And so I get very energized from this. And I think what protects me from burnout personally is also knowing what my ultimate goal is. And so I'm married now, and we're going to have plan for a family in the future. And so part of my business serves two purposes. It allows me to do more in ministry and allows me to provide for my family. And as soon as the business gets out of that pocket where it's encroaching on family time or it's encroaching on ministry time, then I know that I'm on the edge of burnout because it's no longer serving the ultimate goal. And that's true, I think, for leaders and pastors, is your family is still your ultimate goal. And so you have to protect. If your ministry is getting so big that it's affecting family time, your first call, then you need to protect that and bring it back down, whether it be delegating. Where's that release valve, if you will? And so I always think through that. What's my ultimate goal here? And if your ultimate goal is to build your business, then you still have to protect your time, because if you burn out, you're not protecting the business. And, so yeah, I don't know if there's a one fix solution, but that helps me compartmentalize and think if other things are stressing, then we need to figure out that's the warning sign for me.
That's really great that you take so much time for self-reflection to protect that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what has God been saying to you for 2024?
Yeah, I keep thriving.
Word of the day.
Yeah. For me in Hey Church, it's really about empowering the church. Again, as I just shared, building the church is my ultimate goal for this. And Hey Church is my current vehicle for making that happen. This is how I could be the most impactful for the kingdom at large. And so just empowering is kind of the word I feel for it. The stronger we get as a business, the stronger we can help churches. And when we grow, we serve more churches, and it's that symbiotic relationship. And again, as I mentioned earlier, just that tension tension's the right word, of being a good ministry advocate and a good business owner. And so just, working on that this year, but just That's optimistic and hopeful for what God's going to be doing in the business and the churches we serve. That's the most exciting part.
You said something really cool that I didn't go back to and that I want to make sure we do. And that is, you talked about how your whole team intentionally serves as well at church.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's important? What do you see the impact is of that?
Oh, it's huge. When you have a team that serves a church, so they get it, they understand it. And so the admins that work on my team are admins that used to work in-house for churches, which means they can see the blind spots of pastors. They can see the blind spots of other admins that are just trying to get stuff off their plate. And we can ask clarifying questions. And the benefit, so I've worked in churches sub 50, and I've worked in churches over 7,000 people. So I've seen the wide array of it. Yeah. And so I can ask those questions and see what's missing and help clarify the vision and support it. Not really setting vision for leaders in churches. That's not what we do. But we help clarify it. And when they make a task request, we can say, okay, is this going to be the best use, or should we do this instead? And they can say no, and we'll do it the way they want it. Or they can say, oh, that's great. Thanks for pointing that out. And we'll do that as well. And so when you have people that have been there and already done it, they can ask those questions from the outside now without the emotional pressure of being inside of the church. And I think that's true with business as well. You should always hire people who have worked in the industry and understand it, so they can understand their customers and who you take care of.
I love the idea that if somebody sends you something, you're perceiving it and receiving it from the outside. Mm-hmm. So if there is a problem, you're more likely to catch it versus even someone with your expertise from the inside who just has heard too many conversations to really just receive it the way it's coming. That's such a great thing to explain.
Yeah. And it helps. Like, one example is a church we work with who has multiple admins. They have multiple volunteers. So there's nobody on staff, which is where we come in and we can really help. But they all have the privileges to request tasks. And so
Yeah.
at least two people will submit the same task at one point. And so we'll have to
I've
stop.
never seen that happen before in church.
Yeah. Yeah, you got a lot of people being very helpful. And so we can be that filter of, okay, we got two different tasks here. They might not be the same like end result. And so we can clarify that. And again, having a product owner, as we've talked about earlier, is so helpful. So we can kind of help from the outside influence some organization structure for churches. So we just try and be that sounding wall, that somebody that can kind of help on the outside. Please,
owners, lead pastors, if you have anything you're rolling out and you don't have a project owner, let us say, please make one.
Yes.
Please make one. No, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything we didn't talk about you want to cover?
Oh, wow. We could revisit anything we talked about today and keep this going. I think we can cut it off now and we can do another one later.
How does someone connect with you when they're like, oh, I need this?
Yep. You can head to our website, heychurch.co. That's where we have all of our content. We also, we have our own podcast on Spotify and Apple.
Oh,
You can go there, Hey Church. And then we're also on Instagram and every social media platform. So at heychurch.co is where we are everywhere. And you can also email us up at hey@heychurch.co.
Oh, that's a really hard email address. Thank you.
Yep. We keep things simple. That's our goal here.
Preston, thank you so much. Have a great day. It was amazing having you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Candace. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye. Hey, Holy Business community. If you just listened to the interview with Preston and were as impressed as I was by his passion and his desire to serve the church in a unique way, then you need to check out their services for your own church community. Go to heychurch.co/holybusiness to get connected with them. And if you sign up for their unlimited task plans, for our listeners, they're giving 15% off the first 3 months of those services. So go check them out, hand off things that aren't in your purview, in your area of expertise, so that you can go back to using that bandwidth to love on the people of your community today. Check them out. You will be so excited you did.